Are you serious? Are you serious? Do you really want to be a socialistic society? Do you even know what socialism really looks like? Of course not, because our core curriculum has decided not to teach the tragedy of communism or socialism within a society. But I'll help you. If you give me 4 minutes, I'll show you why you don't want to be anything close to a government takeover of your economy and of your capitalistic opportunities. Here's why. Here's what happens. In Venezuela, they are having an absolute chaos. They've run out of food. Lines are unbelievable. We're talking 3 miles long. People trying to get food, basic foods, water, and things they need. After several years of long lines, this has been going on for almost 3 years now, since 2013, rationing and shortages. The socialist country does not have enough food to feed its population. And the opposition government has declared a nutritional emergency. This is just the most recent nail in this beleaguered country's slow and painful economic collapse. Many people would expect that an economic collapse to be something shocking and instant and very dramatic, but really it's far more gradual than that. It looks like empty shelves, long lines, and desperate government officials trying to protect themselves and hungry people. For the past 2 years, Venezuela has been sliding into an eventual unfolding and collapsing of their economy. Here's what happened. In 2013, many began to suspect that the outlook for Venezuela was grim when prepping became illegal. You could not store food and water. It was an illegal practice. The Attorney General of Venezuela, Luis Ortega Diaz, called on prosecutors to target people who were hoarding basic staples with serious sanctions. So in other words, you couldn't buy and store away to prepare for your family. Prosecutors come after you. They'd take everything you got, throw you in jail. Okay? Now, shortly thereafter, the grocery stores instituted a fingerprint registry. Oh, okay. So in other words, you have to have your fingerprint. You have to have a mark of identification to buy or sell in this socialist society of Venezuela. All right? And families had to register and have fingerprinted for registry. All right? Now, the long lines then for the basic necessities such as laundry, soap, and diapers and food became the norm rather than the exceptions. Thousands of people were standing in line for 5 to 6 hours a day and hoped they would be able to purchase a few small needed items. And shortly after the story broke to the rest of the world, the propaganda machine shifted into high gear as the government began to ration electricity. All right? It was announced that this was not due to economic reasons at all, but instead as a measure of their great concern for the environment. Have you heard that before? And what do we have happening now? Everything now is going green. We have to protect the environment. So you're already beginning to see soft rationing of things in America. It's being done now, and companies are being heavily encouraged to follow along with this concept in conserving of water or air or whatever else they think they have to conserve. Okay, now, as the situation continued to evolve, farmers in Venezuela were forced to hand over their crops last summer. They assumed control, the government assumed control of the essential goods like food and began putting retail outlets out of business because the government would go to the farmers and force them to sell their crops at 30 cents on the dollar to the government, not to the open market. And then the government would set up their own government food distribution centers where the people had to go to get the food, and they had to have their fingerprinted ID to get it, which created long lines. And, here you are in a nanny state now of socialism. As the situation continued to get worse, there wasn't enough food to keep the population fed. Now, if you're a farmer, are you going to farm the fields if the government's going to come later and force you to sell to them, I think the next year you're just not going to plant. Why plant? You don't even have you didn't make any money the year before. Where are you going to get the money to get the seed to plant again? And oh, by the way, are you going to be allowed to sell then in the market? Historically, then what happens is that farmers then decided not to farm the land, which means now there's less food. And nobody wants to ship food into Venezuela because they can't get paid. I mean, if you own a distribution company and you wanted to ship containers worth of food into Venezuela, if it was a capitalistic society, you know that they'd be buying the food. You'd probably even be able to mark up the prices a little bit as you're selling into this open market. But instead, boats would show up with containers of food, and the government would seize the product. Just take the food. Maybe give you pennies on a dollar and tell you to get out of the port or be arrested. Are you coming back? I don't think so. And the farmers have quit farming because they don't get paid but pennies on the dollar. And the people are working, but for what? And when they get what little bit of money they're earning, they go to buy the food. They can't get the food. That now they're cutting their electricity at night. Now that the water's starting to get rationed, everything is falling apart in this socialist society of Venezuela. It took 3 years of a gradual slide. And let me just tell you something. You haven't seen greed yet. You haven't seen greed. When you hear these politicians talk about crony capitalism, you haven't seen real greed till you see a desperate society and the government in control of the food and water. Then you will find out what greed is all about. You will watch the government start to decide who gets to eat and who don't. You're going to see a social change like you've never seen before. Desperation will begin, and desperate people will do desperate measures. Oh, you don't want to go to a socialist society, America. It will be the death of this great nation. So, what we need is to turn to Jesus Christ. We need to get back to freedom, a liberty, which does nothing more than inspire the entrepreneur spirit and keeps things flowing, including jobs, opportunities, lower prices, competitive spirit, keeps prices low and keeps America turning. Folks, this is a dangerous time in our nation's history, the most dangerous time ever. And there's 2 reasons. Number 1, we're wanting to turn our backs and become a society dependent like a nanny state. And number 2, we want to turn our backs on God. And they kind of go hand in hand. Socialist and communist governments always are anti-Christ. Just study your history. Oh, I'm sorry. Most of you don't know anything about history because you grew up in the core curriculum of this great country. I'm Pastor Paul Begley. Read your Bible. It's the greatest history there is of all time. And then study what's caused other empires to fall. And it's godlessness and greed and a central controlling government of socialism, which ultimately becomes communism. It don't work. Jesus is coming soon.